Hello everyone and welcome to another crawler Let's Build. Today's episode is slightly different formatting wise. We are actually starting at the end. And what I mean by that is that this is actually where we currently are, the ending of all the time-lapse video. And I'm actually going to send you backwards in time to start the time-lapse. But we are not going back forward in time in order to do so. So, and I know that sounds really confusing, but what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to walk through all of this with you, and then I'm going to send you guys on your time-lapse adventure, and that's going to be it. I'm not going to do any commentary for today's episode, and because I want to see if you guys kind of enjoy just watching me build without any sort of audio or me talking over the music. So let me know what you guys think about that in the comments down below. And also, because I'm not going to say it later, please make sure you like, possibly even comment, subscribe, and hit that bell icon if you want to get notified next time I post up a video. Because I can sometimes screw up, and I might not post on the same day. Speaking of screw-ups, let me explain to you something very important that's going to sound really stupid. This is actually the second time I have recorded this entire thing. I actually did, in fact, record me doing all of what you're seeing right here earlier. However, I made it oopsie. What essentially happened is that I was doing some math while we were talking, and it just so happened I was doing some dividing. Now, for those of you that don't know how I record stuff, I have a hotkey that I press to start recording and stop recording, and that's why you'll sometimes hear like a keyboard click right at the end of the video. It just so happens that my divide key is my start and stop record button. What that means is, while I was doing math, I was stopping and restarting recording. Which meant that I had sections that didn't really work together. As a result, I am now having to re-record this, and sadly you guys will have to kind of just believe me that this all works and that these colors make sense. And I'm very sorry about that, but that's just kind of how the nature goes sometimes. We just have to deal with what we got. That being said, what you're looking at is a microcontroller. Specifically, it is a microcontroller that deals with the lights in a unit. Now, what I mean by that is that, in the crew quarters, you will be all the lights that are going to be overhead will be status lights, as in addition to illumination. They will indicate what the status of that unit is for the crawler. And I may have mentioned this already when I first started doing the master-slave systems, but originally the master control units were going to send the slaves what the status colors were. I've decided that that's a bad idea. And I know it sounds really weird, but the reason for that is twofold. One, I'm sending composite over composite, which doesn't really work. And it makes it really hard for me to send data. Two, it's actually easier, in my opinion, to send if there's any sort of emergency that would change the status lights of a unit, just to send what that status is to the main controller, instead of it having to read what that status is, figure out what the new color of the lights are, and then send those colors back to the unit. Now, that being said, the way that this works now is that it accepts 3 inputs and outputs 1 composite. The composite is an RGB. The RGB data. Specifically, it is channel 1 is red, channel 2 is green, and channel 3 is blue, or RGB, for those of you that don't know what that stands for. Which is possibly a couple of you. I'm not sure. I don't want to make assumptions on that. But the way in which that works is that I have to figure out what the colors are. And that's what this whole gobbledygook of nonsense looking at is. If you look, you'll notice that there are 3 of these boxes. And if we zoom in, you will notice these are actually the inputs. The 3 inputs that go into the controller. That is general alarm, flooding, and emergency alarm. Now, for those of you that haven't been on a ship before, the general alarm is in fact different than an emergency alarm. And I'll kind of explain that in a little bit once I start getting into what all these statuses mean. But looking at here, I've almost got like a waterfall sort of situation, with the output being at the end of the waterfall. The way that it works is that the beginning of the waterfall, or the lake at the top, if you will, is general status. So everything's peachy, nothing's bad is really occurring. And that is kind of a subdued white. So you'll notice the blue is not a 1, and these do range from 0 to 1. They're not a byte, they're 0 to 1. So, which kind of drives me nuts, but I'm sure there's a reason why they designed it that way. And that goes into a composite write, and then that goes into a switch box. And the switch box, you'll see that there are 3 switch boxes. And that essentially means, do we pull from this composite and send that on, or do we get from this composite and send it on? And that's what, it's just a generic switch box. And those are set up to the 3 status. So if this is not occurring, it passes the general status, sorry, not general status, the all clear on to this one. Is there flooding? No. Send all clear. Is there an emergency alarm? No. Send all clear to output. And from there, we can kind of understand where this is going. So the first one is the first importance, or sorry, least importance, is the general alarm. And the reason why I kind of cut myself off there is because the way that this is built is that this one supersedes all of these. So if the emergency alarm is going off, none of these status get through. There immediately goes into the emergency alarm. Same with the flooding. If the flooding is occurring but not the general alarm, it will be showing the flooding light. Excuse me. So the next importance supersedes it. And I'll explain why I've decided to do this as the importance in a bit later. So general alarm goes into a blinker, and the reason why is because I didn't want the general alarm to be a solitary color. And there's kind of a weird reason for that. And it occurs to me that I could probably make this look a bit nicer. But the reason why is because I want there to be a flash during, and not like a strobe, but like general status and then a flash every couple seconds. And specifically, I have set it up so that every 2.5 seconds, there will be a 5-second flash of a second color. And that second color is a bright red light. And it is in fact the same color, if you follow these lines, that goes straight into the emergency alarm coloration. So this is the general alarm coloration. And that's also going into the switch box for the, emergency alarm, general alarm. There we go. Sorry. If it's the same color that they both share, it's just the general alarm doesn't have it solid. It has it intermittently flashing between the general state, or the all clear state, which is kind of like a subdued white. So that gets sent on, and that again flashes. Next is flooding. Flooding is a kind of bluish teal color. And the reason why is because I didn't want it to be super bright, but I didn't want it to be super dark, but I wanted it to be very clearly blue. So that's why it's kind of a weird color. It's kind of a tealish bluish color. And these numbers do correlate with that. I was using a RGB calculator in the background. And that's why I had to do, I had to type out some math, is because that reads it, or that gives it to me as a byte. Whereas this wants it from a 0 to 1. So that's the reason why. And then you've got the emergency alarm. And the emergency alarm is just a straight red. There's no strobe. It's just straight red. And the reason why is because I don't like strobe emergency alarms. They drive me nuts. I don't like strobes. Or I don't like prolonged strobes. I mean, a small bit, yeah, that's fine. But a strobe in a emergency situation does the exact opposite of what you want it to do. In fact, because it will start to blind you from the rapid change from bright light to no light, and the eyes don't have time to adjust to either of them, so it starts to kind of blind you, which sends you into a panic, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do during an emergency. So that's why I changed it that way. It seemed reasonable enough to me. Now, as for why they're in this setup, in my mind's eye, emergency alarm is always going to be supersede everything. That makes perfect sense to me, because an emergency alarm is everything's going terribly. I don't want to curse this time around, but everything's just going absolutely god awful. This is like essentially either a abandoned ship or your lives are forfeit kind of situation. This is a all hands on deck, everything's going wrong sort of situation. Next is flooding. And flooding is not an emergency alarm. And I know that's kind of weird considering that this is something that's supposed to be underwater. But the reason why is because each of the units are supposed to be able to be independently sealed from each other. And those are hermetic seals, meaning that water cannot, they're airtight seals, meaning that water cannot go between the two units if those seals are locked in place. And all of the units will have a method for pumping water out of them, so that in worst case scenario, a unit starts to flood, they will be able to drain that water out of the unit. You'll want to get out of the unit as soon as you can, obviously, but it isn't a situation that you can't recover from. Now, I will make a note that if the flooding is bad enough, depending on where the location is, the master control unit might send that flooding signal to the nearby units as well, because these are normally the general state, the general alarm, and the flooding are all localized to that unit. The emergency alarm is all units get that signal, but those are for the most part pretty localized to the unit. The general alarm can be sent to the rest of the crawler, but typically it's just in each individual unit. But essentially the way that it works, the reason why, I have been talking for way too long tonight. If the flooding's bad enough in a unit, the master control system may send a flooding signal to the other units that are directly connected to it, so that they can be aware that there might be flooding starting to occur. And if those units do start to flood and it starts to snowball, then it will go into an emergency. Now, last state is the general alarm. Now, for those of you that haven't been on a ship before, you may be confused as to why there's a general alarm and an emergency alarm. Or, sorry, rather, have not been on a cruise ship before, you may be confused why there's a general alarm versus an emergency alarm. On a cruise ship, there are 3 alarms. There's the general alarm, the station's alarm, and the emergency alarm. Obviously, there's not a station's alarm in this sort of situation, so we don't have that. Emergency alarm is get everybody off the ship as immediately as possible and as safely as possible. General alarm is the exact opposite of that spectrum. It is keep in mind that situations are occurring on the ship, so please be aware of your surroundings and keep your ears and eyes open to what is going on around you. A common situation that would cause a general alarm is possibly children getting lost from their parents, especially if the cruise ship is big enough. That would cause a small general alarm. And more often than not, on cruise ships, the general alarm is not normally sounded via the ship horn. It is typically sounded via the radio unless it's a ship-wide emergency general alarm. And I know that is completely against what I just said, but believe me, that makes more sense in my mind than it probably does to yours. But the general alarm will send out, let everybody know in that unit, keep your eyes open, the situation might be developing. Please pay attention to your surroundings until the general alarm has been silenced. So there's that, and that's literally all this does. All this amazingly annoying systems. So now that that has been all done, I am going to send you guys back into the past so you get to see what all led to this point. Now I will really quickly apologize for how short this video is. I had some unexpected complications occur on my end, both in terms of recording and my normal life, so that kind of didn't really help, and I'm very sorry about that. But hopefully you do enjoy this video, and you get to see kind of a small bit of what crew life is like aboard the ship. So, as always, please leave a like, comment, and make sure you subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.